kind of in parallel, we've been exploring tweaks to the models that we have presented last month. Yeah, there are a couple of links in the agenda. This continuous time matching link is pretty much the version that we converged on in the last month's meeting. But yeah, there are a couple other insights that we thought of. So our economics researcher wrote up a paper on this idea of selective delay. For those of you who haven't read it, the idea is generally that when you request to fill an order, whoever is signing off on that would wait roughly 1 second before approving it. And this essentially gives makers more time to cancel their orders and gives them a free option for that 1 second duration, which, as showed in the paper, should result in lowered spreads all around. And this could be used with like any matching relayers or any variant of the TEC, really. Curious to get people's thoughts on this. It's a little bit of a deviation from the regular model, but I also think like from a UX perspective, it's probably not even really noticeable. This is also a technique that is, it's used in Forex markets pretty frequently, I believe. And there's also a stock exchange called IEX that uses it. I think it has something like 3% of the equities volume.
So would that be an off-chain cancel that the maker could do within that period?
Yep.
Okay.
So basically works with any model that allows for off-chain cancels.
Mia, would you see us maybe doing both, or will we kind of choose one for the shorter time period and then just go with that and see how it works? Or do you think we would end up with having both eventually?
Theoretically, this should result in better spreads if we just always do it. I think it could be pretty tricky to only do it in special cases. I guess another thing here is that you're sort of trusting whoever's coordinating the orders to actually enforce this delay. And in the short run, we can add some sort of an auditability trail to that by like making them broadcast certain messages at certain points. In the long run, you can actually enforce this via smart contract by like making the coordinator run a verifiable delay function. But if you don't make this something that's mandatory, then I just feel like the incentives become a little weird. Like if the TEC is trading on their own relayer, for example, they could just not enforce the delay, or they could like give different traders different deals and stuff like that. Is this something that people would be open to implementing? Cool. Well, if there are no objections, I think we will probably add this to like the standard TEC node implementation. Yeah, don't think there should really be any downsides here. So
I think we could probably have a Discord channel where we can, I guess, dive into this a bit more. If you do have questions after maybe digging in deeper today, I think we believe this is the way forward. But if you guys have any concerns or questions, then definitely talk to us in Discord, because we're really kind of requesting some feedback on this, and that would be great.
Yep. So as I said, this next point on the agenda, the continuous time matching post, is pretty high level spec of what we talked about last month. Shouldn't really be much new there. So I think we could pretty much skip past that. But I did want to talk about this next idea, which we thought of pretty recently. I just wrote up a quick post about it. But the TLDR of it is that, you know, with the current TEC model, you have the taker request to fill some orders. The TEC can approve that with some expiration time. And then the TEC is essentially promising that they're not going to let anyone else fill those orders until that has expired. So one of the problems that people worry about a lot is, like, can't the taker just reserve orders and not actually follow through on filling those orders? And you know, there are a bunch of built-in mitigations for that, which we discussed last month and are also outlined in this continuous time matching post. And the question is, are takers going to abuse this? Are they going to just arbitrarily reserve orders without actually intending on filling these orders? And are the current mitigations enough to prevent them from doing that? So one realization we had is that if you do not actually care about preventing front running and trade collisions, you could run a TEC that only enforces soft cancels, but does not actually reserve orders under any circumstances. So this essentially turns into open order book with the ability to cancel things off chain. So this is kind of a nice middle ground, I think, between the current open order book model and the TEC model. And yeah, curious if anyone has any thoughts on that.
This is new to me as well, Amir, so I have actual questions on this. Does that mean it reduces the front running just for the makers, but it still exists for the takers?
Yeah, so front running is still totally possible. Although in theory, I think there should still be fewer trade collisions, just because makers will be able to cancel their orders off chain more frequently. So like, you might request to fill some orders, and then rather than wasting gas on that, the relayer will just tell, or the TEC will tell you, this thing has been canceled already, try again. So, you know, in that sense, it does prevent trade collisions a little bit, but the TEC, you know, otherwise is not checking to see if they've already signed off on a fill. They're literally only checking to see if they have soft canceled an order. Any other questions? Cool. So I think we can move on to the next point. So this next topic is about implementing a forwarder contract that would be compatible with any TEC model. So for those of you who aren't aware, the current forwarding contract is kind of used for abstracting away wrapping ether, setting your allowances, and paying ZRX fees. And it's used pretty much as the backend for ZRX Instant, and currently only works with open order book relayers. So it's a bit tricky to do with a TEC because in this model, the forwarder contract is actually filling orders itself. It is the taker. It'll just ingest orders, fill them, and then send the remaining tokens back to the sender. So how can we do that with the TEC model? Well, in version 2, smart contracts can actually trade from their own balances, and they can generate orders or 0x meta transactions. And all they need to do is define a single function called isValidSignature. And this just defines the logic for their own signature verification. And if they do this, you can basically have this model where anyone can generate these transactions on behalf of the forwarder contract and then send that to the TEC. And then the TEC can approve these things, send them back to the original sender, and the sender can execute the function on the forwarder contract and do the trade much in the same way as the existing forwarding contract. The issue is that since anyone can create one of these transactions on behalf of the forwarder, it becomes very easy to grief the TEC. I could just say like, hey, I'm going to fill these orders through the forwarding contract. Forwarding contract does not actually hold any balance of any tokens at any point. So the TEC has to kind of blindly approve that transaction without really being able to validate users' balances or anything like that, and just fully trust that the sender is actually going to follow through on this fill. So there are kind of some workarounds to identify who the actual sender of this message is. But they involve using an extra signature. So now you would require 2 signatures to work with this forwarding contract, which is not ideal from a UX perspective. Curious if anyone has thoughts on any of that, or would like me to dive in deeper on anything. Okay. In general, you know, I usually ask this every dev meeting or every dev meeting where we have talked about these TECs. Curious what the level of interest is in actually adopting this as a strategy for the existing relayers on this call. And I'm also curious, you know, I know one of the nice things about Open Order Book is that there's no onus on the relayer to do any sort of matching. And I know some people had potentially legal concerns around that. And I was wondering if it would be helpful if next month on the call, we brought on our lawyer, Jason, to potentially discuss some of his thoughts around running a TEC.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. That is one of our concerns about running a TEC is some of the legal ramifications that we go from being a passive publisher of information that came from other sources to an active participant where something we publish is necessary, or that we are the originator of is necessary to fill the orders. Yeah, and I know Greg has already had some conversations with Jason, but yeah, it might be interested to get a wider view of that.
Yep. And based on what we had previously talked about too, I think it's something that everybody could benefit from hearing, just because it kind of fleshes out some unexplored space in the uncertain regulatory environment we're all kind of sort of tangentially involved with, even if we're not asking the same exact questions because of how we do things.
Yep, makes sense. Are there any other reps from relayers on this call right now that would be interested in that as well? Just curious on the general format of this call. It seems like these topics I kind of just went over are pretty technical, and I'm not sure, if everyone has time to read these things or fully understand them. I'm just curious if anyone has any feedback around like what types of topics are worth talking about. Is this helpful for you?
I guess generally, I like the format of these calls and I like the technical detail. We're currently inclined to steer away from TECs because of the out of legal concerns. And so, on that front, I don't have a whole lot of to say about today's call in particular when it's a technical discussion on something we're at least currently inclined to stay away from for legal reasons.
Okay, that's fair. Makes sense.
As a more non-technical member of the call, I actually appreciate the context it gives. Even though I might not understand all the terms, it's useful. So even when I'm sort of in my head going, what the heck does this mean? It actually gives me some fodder to ask Austin questions later. So for what it's worth, I appreciate it.
Cool. And we're trying to make more use of our forum as well, so that these thoughts are just out there and people could read them on their own time and respond or ask questions on their own time as well. But yeah, curious if anyone else finds this helpful or not.
Definitely, I appreciate the forum being used quite a bit recently. I think you guys have published some really interesting kind of thought pieces. I know some people on our end plan to get involved on those discussions, so I'm excited to see those forums kind of becoming a center around this discussion. I think that's going to be an interesting and important piece as obviously 0x moves towards a kind of a truly open source project.
Nice.
Oh, and I do have a specific question about the release schedule around the TC server spec.
Yeah.
Is there any update on that?
I don't have an exact timeline for you, but I would say it's probably like 70% done right now. But our focus right now is more on the contracts. I think the same contracts will be used regardless of which of these models we end up going with, but the server spec can actually change a decent amount.
Definitely, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Jacob, do you want to give an update on the multi-asset proxy voting?
Yeah, totally. So some of you are aware we've deployed this multi-asset proxy, which allows you to trade like bundles of tokens, so multiple ERC-721s or mixing ERC-721 with ERC-20. So these are very useful for like the NFT gaming spaces, as well as like prediction markets and token sets. So this is actually going to be a bit of a hot upgrade, as we like to call it. So that means it's modifying some of the current running contract state. So this multi-asset proxy will be basically whitelisted into the ERC20 proxy as well as the ERC721 proxy. So, there is a small amount of risk here. It's not just a brand new contract that hasn't been touched before and people kind of, I guess, whitelist and allow themselves. It's touching running state. So due to that fact, we are basically going to do a governance vote on this. So that will be occurring by the end of next week. There will be a vote to either allow or disallow this contract to be added to the protocol itself. You can vote on the zerox.org/vote website once that's launched, and you can vote with either like your MetaMask and your Ledger, and you will be basically voting with the amount of ZRX that you hold. At this stage, it's not necessarily a completely untrusted or a trustless voting mechanism. It's more of like a signaling mechanism. But yeah, so that vote will run for about a week, and we will gather the results and continuously publish like the ongoing tally. But at the end of the week, we will get the results, calculate the balances for and against, and kind of see where the community thinks this should go. And at that stage, we will, if it's been accepted, we will make the appropriate state changes. And you will kind of see them in our multisig, which controls the protocol. So you kind of see like a bunch of transactions that appear in the multisig, and we will provide some transparency onto what those transactions actually do mean and how that state transition will happen. And then it will basically take 2 weeks for the delay in the multisig to actually finalize the state transition. So if you're interested in the multi-asset proxy, I would say come and vote next week. But it'll take about 3 weeks for the actual state changes to be reflected on mainnet. It can currently be used on the testnets if you want to experiment with it right now. But if you have any further questions, then feel free to ask them either right now or just follow up on Discord.
Cool. Thank you for that update, Jacob. All right. So this last point on the agenda, man, we got through this more quickly than expected. So I don't know if people have been following the Stanford Blockchain Conference at all, which was last week. Starkware gave a talk on building a scalable decentralized exchange using Starks. And just want to tell people that we have been working with Starkware on this for a couple months now, and we are going to continue working with them on this. This is one of our long-term bets. But that being said, I think we can actually get this the StarkDEX to a pretty usable state in not that much time. We're expecting an alpha out in probably 2 months or so that will be strictly testnet. And it's going to be very simple. It will just support single fills, no partial fills, no cancels. It'll only be for ERC20 tokens. And then we are targeting a mainnet MVP probably roughly in September. So at a high level, what this StarkDEX does is it requires traders to deposit their assets in a contract, and then they can essentially trade fully off-chain. And then every now and then, a prover will generate a zero-knowledge proof that proves the state transitions from point A to B, which can then be verified by a smart contract and basically update only the state root of all the user balances. So this allows the cost of transactions to scale sublinearly with the size of a proof. So we think that this is going to be a really important piece of research for scaling. I think this can probably be optimized to about 10,000 trades per batch. It costs roughly 6 million gas to verify a proof as is, which is about 75% of the entire block gas limit. But we are also making a push within the Ethereum community to lower the gas costs of call data, which would generally benefit all the layer 2 scaling solutions out there, because a lot of them make pretty heavy use of off-chain data, Merkle proofs, and stuff like that. So that's kind of the gist of the StarkDEX. I'm happy to talk about more implementation details if people are interested in that.
I have a quick question, Amir. So you said it was about 6 million gas for that. What percentage of that is the call data? Would you say it's the majority of it, like the verifying?
Yeah, I don't have the exact percentage, but the vast majority of it is the call data. Verification of Starks on chain is actually not that expensive. It's just that the size of the proof is very large.
Your question, Philippe from Horizon. You're saying it would be 6 million gas for 10,000 transaction. Now, considering the size of Stark proof increases logarithmically based on the number of inputs, is it 10,000? Because it seems like there's still 2 millions that we could go extract or add some transactions. So is it 10,000 targets due to the proving time, or because it seems to me that the additional 2 million you could reach maybe 100 transaction or trade per second, considering the increase in.
Yeah, those are very rough numbers. You're probably right about that. I think actually our current estimates, or our current proving costs, are about 6 million gas, and we're doing like significantly less than 10,000 trades. But Starkware's estimates are that we can get that to about 10,000, and I'm not sure what the final gas cost looks like there. But we're at an Ethereum 1.x workshop. I think it was 2 weeks ago now. And Remco made a proposal to reduce the cost of call data by a factor of 20, which I think was actually pretty well received, just because it's so important for so many of the solutions being developed. And also, we kind of see it as a way of managing the state size, because it incentivizes people to do more things off-chain versus storing them in state. So conceivably, the cost could be significantly lower.
That's super cool. Thank you.
I guess in terms of rough timeline estimates, Amir, when do you think a StarkDEX may be available on mainnet?
I think the current goal is September of this year, and that would be mainnet, probably still ERC20 only, and would support cancels and partial fills, but still will not have all the bells and whistles of the existing 0x. But it would be usable and scalable, which I think is what matters.
Is StarkDEX aware of their Google problem?
Should I Google them right now?
Maybe not at work.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, probably not. I don't think StarkDEX is actually an official name for this thing. It's kind of just what we've been using internally. But it'll probably be called something else at some point down the line.
Yeah, don't Google it.
Thank you for the warning.
Yep.
Cool. Well, yeah, does anyone have any other questions on StarkDEX or?
Yes, ready.
I don't know, implementation details?
I might have another one. Could you talk a bit more about the depositing and withdrawing process if the
Yes.
operator becomes unavailable, or data availability in general?
Yeah, so actually, why don't I start generally with like the advantages to using this model versus something like the existing plasma solutions out there. When the operator updates the state, they actually cannot, like the state transition has to be valid, because the way this works is it uses validity proofs rather than fraud proofs. So Plasma kind of assumes that the operator is being honest, and then if they're being dishonest, someone could prove that and slash them and whatnot. With this StarkDEX, this is actually not possible. Every single state transition has to be valid. So that's one of the advantages. What this also means is that when you want to withdraw from the contract, you can withdraw instantly. So you'd basically request a withdrawal from the operator. They would include that in the next batch, and then the tokens would be transferred to you. So, well, this isn't actually instant, but it's in the time that the prover is actually submitting these proofs. So maybe they're doing it once a minute or something like that. But you're not going to have to wait like a week or anything like that. So how do we handle the data availability problem? So when you want to withdraw, as I mentioned, the first way you request that the prover include it in the next proof. Now, if for some reason they're censoring you, they're not including it in the proof, you can call the smart contract directly and request a withdrawal. And if that withdrawal is not processed by the prover within some amount of time, let's say a day, then essentially the entire contract will go into this exit mode. It'll just freeze. It'll no longer accept any new states. And at that point, everyone would just have to withdraw on their own time. In order to do this, since we're only storing the state roots in the smart contract, everyone who wants to withdraw would need a Merkle path of their balance to the state root. So this is kind of where the data availability problem comes in. So our current thinking around this is that whenever the operator submits a proof, that proof must be signed off by a committee. Let's say there are like 20 people or 20 entities on this committee, and maybe we'd require like 18 of them or so to sign off on a proof. And they're just attesting to the fact that they have the entire state that corresponds to the state root of this proof. And you're essentially trusting that after the contract goes into this exit mode in an emergency scenario, that you could request your relevant state from one of the people on this committee. I think it feels like this is actually more of a theoretical problem than a practical one. In practice, like you could probably just store like every single state transition on IPFS or something like that, or BitTorrent. Also definitely after like an exit situation happened, anyone who had the state would just post it everywhere that they could. But really, you just need one honest party on this committee to exist in order for people to be able to withdraw. It's also like it's not a great attack from the operator's perspective because they don't actually gain anything. It's just like an everyone loses type situation. The worst they could do is lock everyone's funds in the contract.
Great answer.
I guess we can move into a more general Q&A. If there's nothing necessarily that was on this agenda, but you have a burning question for, then probably feel free to ask us.
Yep.
Yeah, I had a question around, this was discussed in Discord, that there is a launch kit with some UI components being built on. Can you guys touch on that?
Yeah, so LaunchKit has already been released, and what we would like to do is also release some UI components for people to kind of take off the shelf and implement as well. Right now, that's going to focus on ERC20, so you can kind of, I guess, get that expected UI UX of the candlesticks, the order book, and stuff like that. So we are currently working on releasing that, which I believe should be landing in like the next month or so. And we also have plans to do something similar, but with more of a ERC 721 marketplace type feel. So in the next couple of months, you should see both an ERC20 front end as well as like an ERC 721 marketplace front end.
Cool, sounds great.
I can ask another question if there's no one else.
Go for it.
All right. I know you guys have a forwarder contract such that buyers can skip the wrapping of their Ether. Have you guys explored and getting ready for using Create2 as a mean to also wrap the Ether in one transaction?
Are you talking about wrapping the Ether from the maker or the taker side?
The taker, such as you can be, well, I was thinking if you could send the Ether somewhere in a contract, and then the contract, someone could just deploy the contract and fill a trade from that contract specifically. Maybe if you send your Ether to something like a smart wallet or very succinct smart wallet, and then it could generate an order from it as well.
It's something I haven't personally thought about that much. What do you see as the benefit of this over the existing forwarding contract?
I'm not sure the benefits, but it allows you to create an order by doing a non-transaction. I don't particularly know if there's a benefit, but I was wondering if it's something that you guys have explored, because I know that for deposit, for example, you can have a one transaction deposit function where instead of doing first approving a contract, then calling a transfer from, you can deposit in a contract, and then the constructor of this predetermined contract will call the transfer from, so the user only does one transaction instead of two. I was wondering if there was something similar you could do with the maker side of creating transactions.
I would need to think about it more. I can't think of an obvious way to do it from the maker's perspective, no matter what. But yeah, let me think about it. And the current forwarder does, allow fills in a single transaction without approvals by takers.
I have a question. It's less technical, so it's about adoption and impact. Where do you see you're having most impact on ERC20 swaps or ERC721? Like where there's more demand, and even what you see going forward?
I think for the time being, probably still ERC20 tokens seems where most of the demand is. You know, there are a lot of ERC20 tokens out there now that I think have pretty good use cases and aren't like totally speculative assets. You know, including things like prediction market tokens, stable coins. I think a lot of the existing 721 tokens are like still somewhat speculative, I guess, more on the collectible side of things, although we're starting to see more pop up that actually do have like in-game use cases and stuff like that. So I think once we start to see more of that, you know, I'm not sure which will have a greater impact, but I think we'll definitely see 721 volumes pick up. And then I'm also pretty bullish on ERC 1155, which we're planning on adding support for as well, which is sort of a hybrid between ERC 20 and 721, and works for things like prediction markets as well as you know, things like video game items. It's hard to say in the long run. It kind of feels like if we had to start over from scratch, or you know, if the entire token ecosystem had to start over from scratch, everything should just be an ERC 1155 token.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions?